Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give a little bit more time to let everyone enter the virtual room. Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a little bit more time to let everyone come into the room. Hello, welcome, everyone. Just a little bit longer. So interesting. Even though it's a virtual room, there's even a virtual queue to let people into the room. So wherever you are, just sit and enjoy your breathing. Okay, I think we've got the majority of people in. So hello and welcome to our third and last Q&A session with the teachers of the recent In the Footsteps of the Thich Nhat Hanh Summit. My name is Denise Wen, and I am the Executive Director of the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation, whose mission is to support and continue the teachings and practices of our dear teacher, Thay. We're so happy that you are joining us today, wherever you are. Thank you. Before we get started with the question and answers, in the Plum Village tradition, we like to begin with listening to 3 sounds of the bell. When we hear a bell, we stop whatever we're doing and bring our attention back to our in-breath and our out-breath. Mindful breathing is like a bridge that brings our body and mind together. So if you generate peacefulness in your breathing, that peacefulness permeates your body and also your state of mind. And during these challenging times, who wouldn't want more peace in our daily lives? So while you're bringing awareness to your breaths, you might like to say to yourself, breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Breathing in, I am mindful I have lungs that are still in good condition. Breathing out, I smile to my lungs that are still in good condition. So in that moment, you touch your lungs with your mindfulness, and then you immediately have the insight that you have a condition of happiness that you may have been taking for granted, and that many people in the world right now wish they had. So throughout today's session, you'll hear the bell invited in between questions. So it'll be an opportunity for all of us collectively together to come home to ourselves and to come home to the present moment. At this time, I actually want to introduce our wonderful teachers who are here today to take your questions. I've known these 3 teachers for a long time, and you're in for a real treat today. First up, we have Brother Phap Hai, which means Brother Dharma Ocean. He became a monk in 1997 and was ordained as a Dharma teacher by Thay in 2003. He leads retreats, workshops, and talks. He's done it throughout the US, Canada, Europe, Asia, and he's also the author of a book called Nothing to It, 10 Ways to Be at Home with Yourself. I was there when he was ordained as a Dharma teacher, and he gave his first Dharma talk, and I thought, who is this wise person? I must have him as a friend, and I've been pestering him ever since to be my friend. And he's joining us today from Australia, where he grew up and is currently teaching. So thank you, Brother Phap Hai, for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Larry Ward. Larry holds a PhD in religious studies with an emphasis on Buddhism and research on meditation and neuroplasticity. He is also ordained as a Dharma teacher by Thich and serves as director of the Lotus Institute. And Larry has been featured in the Lion's Roar magazine, Tricycle magazine, and Krista Tippett's program called Speaking of Faith. And any time with Larry is like receiving a shower of Dharma rain. Thank you, Larry, for joining us today. And we are glad to welcome back Dr. Peggy Rowe Ward. So if you haven't noticed, Larry and Peggy are sharing a screen, and that's because they are married. So Peggy met Tay in 1991 and was later ordained by him as a Dharma teacher in 2001. Peggy currently serves as a faculty member on the Mindfulness Leadership Program at Atlantic University and is the co-author of 2 books, Making Friends with Time and Love's Garden, A Guide to Mindful Relationship. And Peggy is just full of light and heart and compassion. It just completely radiates out of her all the time. Thank you, Peggy, for joining us today. And we also have 2 wonderful helpers today, Brother Phap Hai, who is joining us from Plum Village Monastery, and Nicole Kramer, who is joining us from San Francisco, and they are making everything run smoothly in the background today. So thank you so much to both of them. So a little bit about the technicalities of today. So our Q&A will be 90 minutes long. If you would like to submit a question to one of our teachers, if you're joining us via Zoom, on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see an icon that says Q&A. So click on that and you can start typing in your question. And please use that box and not the chat box to submit your questions. It's really helpful for us to just go to one spot for the questions. And if you're okay asking your question live on camera, when you submit your question, you can mark okay to ask live or note that you're okay asking it live. That will be helpful for us. Now, unfortunately, we can't answer everyone's question. We will try to address 8 to 10 questions during this session. So if your question is picked, you'll be able to ask it live on camera. So one of our moderators will also be contacting you via the chat box to ask if you're okay asking the question on camera. And this will help our teachers see the person behind each question so we can all have a sense of community and togetherness. Now, we know a good question can benefit many people, so we really encourage people to share questions that come from your heart, that have to do with your happiness, your suffering or practice, rather than theoretical or philosophical questions. And we know a good question doesn't have to be long, but rather concise, and this will help us make sure there's time to answer as many of your questions as possible. So let's do 3 sounds of the bell. I totally I jumped to introducing teachers because I was so excited about them, but let's start right now with 3 sounds of the bell. And actually at this moment, before we start taking your questions, excuse me, we actually have some questions for you. So we have a poll question, and it will help us to get to our teachers to know who's here, who's present. So if we can launch our poll questions. If you could take the time to answer them, that'll be wonderful. Okay, I think just a little bit longer. Okay. All right, so it looks like, what region are you in? And we have 82% of people coming in from North America right now. And oh, some people from Europe. It is late for you over there, so thank you for joining us from Europe. And then we have South America, Asia, and Australia as well. That is wonderful, a real global gathering today. The second question, have you been on a retreat at a Thich Nhat Hanh founded monastery? And yes, 41% of you, and no, 59% of you. So once this quarantine and outbreak is over, we will definitely welcome those of you who answered no back to one of our monasteries so you can enjoy a retreat with us. The third question, where did you first hear about Thich Nhat Hanh? It seems that most of you first encountered Thay's teachings through a book or listening to an audio book. And then after that, a friend or family member. Same for me. Wonderful. Great. And then the last question, are you a member of a Sangha? A Sangha means a local mindfulness practice community. And yes, 40% of you, and no, 60% of you. So we will be talking about that too, how to find a Sangha. A Sangha, especially during these times when we're in isolation, having a community. A lot of people are meeting virtually now, but having a community to help you with your mindfulness practice is so helpful. So great. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer our poll questions. All right. So for the question, actually, let us enjoy, if we can, if it's okay, we can enjoy another sound of the bell before we start with our questions. Great. So our first question is from Bruce. Welcome, Bruce. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And my question was, what is a good way to apply the teachings of emptiness and interbeing to the current situation in the world? And thank you to everyone for putting this on. This is a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That's a really wonderful question. I think it's a question that many of us have. And I also wanted to ask everybody to consider what we mean by the world when we talk about the world and how to apply these teachings of interbeing and interconnection. Usually when we think of the world, we're thinking of the world outside. But the Buddha also reminded us first and foremost to look at the world inside and to see how we're taking care of our own emotions, our own responses, and also generating the capacities of insight and compassion within the world within, that the world within and the world outside inter-are. At this moment in time, for many of us, like here in Australia, we're in quite reasonably strict lockdown. And it's easy to feel disconnected on the one level. But for me, I see it's also a recognition of the concrete fact of our interbeing, our interconnection. This moment is a recognition of the fact that the actions that we engage in have deep and profound impacts on everybody else. It's a moment in which we have a chance to pause, we have a chance to come back, we have a chance to reorient our lives, and we have a chance really to be able to generate these qualities of heart that the Buddhist practice is all about. So for me, one thing that I would suggest to really look at is to consider the fact that in this situation, we're having a chance to meet an amazing teacher. Usually we think of a teacher as a person, but a teacher can also be a situation, and it can be a virus as well, which it is in this moment. Compassion, we usually think of as having a very gentle face, a face that is kind, welcoming, but there's also another face of compassion, which can be quite fierce and protective. And this moment in time is a time in which we meet a fierce teacher, a teacher that cuts away all of our illusions, our false security, our sense of identity, or what our meaningful contribution is to the world outside. We have a chance to really reorient our lives. So I would say the first step in terms of being able to contemplate interbeing and emptiness is to really take time to be able to experience all of those emotions that we're all going through, experience that sense of loss, experience the shifting in our situation, and to take some time from experiencing those things for ourselves to also practice something similar to what I'm practicing, which is just like me. Just like me, every single other human being in the world is experiencing this, these fears, this sense of isolation. And so rather than being a moment of disconnection, it becomes a moment of connection. I would also say that it's really important at this moment in time, as we experience these moments of disconnection, to take the opportunity to also recognize the preciousness of the connections that we have. I've had friends here in Australia who are pretty much confined to their homes and to a very short distance outside of their homes to do a little bit of exercise, mention things that they hadn't noticed before that were just commonplace, such as I had a gentleman who was walking in a park. We're allowed to go like within a block radius or so, a little bit of a distance from our houses to do some exercise. He said that he was walking in the park, and from a socially distant space, people that would normally not even look at each other were looking at each other, were taking a moment to smile and actually having like some conversation with each other. And that for him, Like he realized that if this situation hadn't come about, he would never have done that. He would never have had that moment of human connection. The other people would have been objects. And I think that was a very deep insight, because when we have an opportunity to go deeply, we start realizing that we've been treating a lot of aspects of our life, whether it's other people or whether it's aspects of our own suffering, as objects, rather than entering into meaningful relationship. So bottom line, I would say this moment in time is a moment in which we have a chance to nurture that sense of relationship, of our deep connection, but with the world within and the world around, by taking care of, first of all, of our reactions, our emotions, our feelings within, and also offering that space to others. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Heba, you are next. Would you like to ask your question? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm calling from Egypt, so I just wanted to say that because it didn't come out on the poll. And I wanted to ask a question about, how do I find a place in my heart to truly forgive people who have caused me pain?
Dear friend, what a deep and beautiful question. How to find the place in my heart for forgiveness. The first thing that comes to my heart and mind is for you to know that it's there. To not get confused, to think it's somewhere else. It is there. And the heart is an interesting thing, because our hearts are way bigger than we know. You know, our hearts just aren't this amazing muscle, but our hearts are more of who we are. So the heart is right there. Forgiveness is a practice. And that's what's helped me. I mean, sometimes it's really easy to forgive something in a moment or the same day, but some things have required me to take a little bit more time, or to have a little bit more time to really cultivate the intention. And so for me, I begin with this heartfelt aspiration that I hear in you already. You have the aspiration, you have the intention to forgive. And this is the starting point. And then to practice forgiveness. Again, not seeing it just as this magic moment in time, but the practice just kind of melts away at whatever is in the way of that. The open heart that's just there. Our hearts are never closed. We just have this stuff. I like the description of red dust that kind of gets in the way, but our hearts are there. So to cultivate forgiveness, what helps me is to use loving kindness meditation practice. I have an altar where I have pictures of the person or the event or that I want to, and I'm practicing forgiveness with, or a symbol of that person right on my altar. And then in my regular practice, I include a loving kindness meditation where I begin by sending love to myself and then extending it as best I can with all the help of all my ancestors to the person that's been harder to forgive. But I have found that the person that's the hardest to forgive is myself. I mean, this is the tricky person here, right here. She's the one that it has been a little harder. And that's again where the loving kindness practices helped me to start and do my best to send that energy, that radiant light of loving kindness right to myself. I've also used a practice that we learned from Desmond Tutu, which was if I was struggling to forgive someone, to have a rock that I keep in my pocket and on the altar, and that I carry that around and bring that rock out of my pocket. And there's something about the weight and texture of a rock that helps me to know when I'm ready to let it go and eventually bury it or throw it in the river. But I just want to just hang in there with it. Just keep practicing, cultivating joy, cultivating happiness, keep your intention alive, have wise people in your heart that can support you, and wise teachings like we have with our beloved teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. I hope that was helpful. You're on the way.
Here we go. I've unmuted myself. Hello.
Sorry, we're just going to do a sound of the bell for 1 second. So next, Elizabeth, thank you for joining.
Thank you. My question is that I recently had a very complicated and rather traumatic back surgery, and I'm recovering at home now. I live alone, and with the world as it is, I can't have anybody in to come and assist me or provide any medical care. That's left me feeling extremely lonely, experiencing a lot of fear and depression. And I've been using mindfulness and meditation to try and bring acknowledgement and awareness to my suffering, but it's still been very challenging. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions that I may use to help ease some of my pain and the suffering that I'm feeling right now.
Thank you for your question. The first thing that came to my mind is the blues. They were invented as a spiritual doorway of practicing with grief and embodying joy at the same time. So every day, actually my morning meditation before I get out of bed is to practice the 5 remembrances. I take 3 breaths and I call the first remembrance to mind. I am of a nature to grow old. I cannot escape growing old. The second remembrance, I am of a nature to have ill health, or I am vulnerable physically and mentally. I cannot escape my vulnerability. The third remembrance is I am of a nature to die. I cannot escape death. And more coming in and settling with my breathing. The fourth remembrance is everything I love and everything I cherish is of a nature to change. I cannot escape loss. And the fifth remembrance is my actions are the ground on which I stand. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. Now for me, I want a few minutes on the fifth one. This means that I, as a human being, and all of us who are able to be online now and have these conversations with one another, it's important to remember we're not 90% of the world who are dwelling in poverty or running from war or starvation. And so the first thing for me is to remember the circumstance that I am in. However weak or strong my experience of comfort might be in the moment, I remember every day I am more comfortable than most human beings on this planet. So it's remembering that I am not alone in my suffering, but also remembering that I have the capacity to be kind to myself in my suffering, kind to myself with my backache, which I understand. The other thing I do in the morning, you may be doing this already, is I make sure that I stretch and release my back before I leap out of bed. I've discovered and learned from other friends in medicine and otherwise how important it is to move slowly when I rise up in the morning, and to do whatever physical movements that help you. The same thing I've learned to do, practice in my evening meditation, which I use 108 breaths that I learned early and many years ago from the Tibetan tradition. And so I count 108 breath from 1 to 108, and then I count backwards from 108 back to 1. Now, I didn't start with 108. I started with 10. and so to me, what that does, though, is it trained me, and it keeps training me in how my mind has power to impact my experience of my body. And it develops in me a kind of concentration so I can stay focused on the parts of my body that may be experiencing pain or discomfort. And the skill, one of the skills in resiliency and trauma, physical or mental, is to be able to know how and where to put our attention so we suffer less. So meditation for me is not just to be calm, is to also be skillful and to learn how to use the mindfulness energy we all have to direct it to the parts of our body where we may not be experiencing pain. I'm celebrating 50 years of a cartilage surgery, and I have learned through meditation practice, especially around mindfulness of the body, how to use my attention to put it in the places in my body that have less pain. And secondly, I have learned how to take the energy of less pain and move it to the part of my body that has more pain, to help that part calm down, to help that part of my body feel cared for, feel nourished, feel loved. The last thing I would say is a great teaching from the Buddha that Thich Nhat reminds us of all the time, is called the second arrow. And the story of the second arrow, I won't go into the great detail, but someone, for example, gets shot in the forest with an arrow. And the normal reactive human response is to look and try to chase, where did that come from? Who did this to me? Why did this happen? But the first thing to do when you're shot with an arrow is to care for your wound. And not let your mind create more pain out of the pain you already have. It's called the second arrow. And so it's easy, it's again, human nature to do this. So there's not anything wrong about this. It's just how we live, how our minds work. And mindfulness is about learning how to live with our minds and our hearts in ways that are constantly being cultivated. So mindfulness is not like a stop on a train where it's a continuous, it's more like the train itself. It's a continuous process of coming home to ourselves, coming home to our body. And for me, it's particularly been difficult to learn how to be kind to my physical pain. So I've been focusing on mindfulness of the body over this last year, and all of the practices that are there in the sutras and other commentaries, and it may be helpful. Take good care of yourself.
Hi, everyone. My question is asking for some perspective on how to be patient with your body as it heals, and to be patient with the pausing of normal life and work. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much for asking your question. When I was reflecting on your question, I was reflecting on my own situation, and a number of years ago, I was experiencing a lot of quite difficult symptoms that I found very challenging. I experienced a lot of physical pain, complete exhaustion. There are times that different organ systems or digestive systems or things like that were not functioning as they function in other people. And I began to get a number of infections all the time. And a common cold would be incredibly severe for me and last 6, 8 weeks or maybe 3 months on one occasion. And so many things like that. And so I was, long story short, I was diagnosed with a complex condition that basically I have quite low immunity and need regular transfusions to maintain some kind of resistance. So in some way, I was on the lighter side. I was sharing with everybody. From me, this current situation of everybody wearing face masks and gloves and things like that is my reality. That this is what my everyday reality is. And so for me, it's always like when that situation emerged for me, I wanted anything but that. All of the ways in which I really felt that I needed to be of service and wanted to be of service, all of these things were no longer available to me in the same form. And I really struggled with that. I would have a sore throat, and then I noticed that I would start thinking things to myself like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? There's this, there's that, there's something else. And I would end up really in states of fear and concern. And I started to realize that what was happening for me was partially because of all the medical information that I was receiving, which I really think is important, but it was quite dire. I was taking that on board, and I was getting into only that on board, and I was getting into a mindset of the what ifs, what if, and rather than the what is. So I began to change my perspective a little bit, to take on board that information, but also to recognize the wonderful conditions that I was experiencing, and to be able to relax around what I thought was the way things should be for me, and to be able to enjoy what is. I found one thing that was very helpful for me was to practice yes, acknowledging the situation. Maybe there's pain, maybe I can't see clearly in a particular moment, maybe I can't breathe properly, all these the way that I think I should, all these kind of things, to practice the yes, but also to practice the and what else is there in this moment, to notice my own tendency to have a micro attention on what's not going according to my plan in this moment, and to broaden my attention to what are the other conditions that I have, and to focus, as Larry was sharing as well, on my body as a teacher, rather than treating my body as an object, as some kind of obstacle to what I think I need to accomplish or do, but to receive it as an invitation, to understand that my body is perhaps my greatest teacher. And so for me, I began to ask myself, and in your question, there's kind of this implied question as well about healing. And I began to ask myself, what does healing or transforming my suffering mean to me? Does it mean that there's no more pain, or there's no more difficulties? And when I asked myself that question and I took it as an object of my contemplation, I realized, I have this delusion that transforming my suffering or healing means that I don't have these physical symptoms, or, I don't experience emotions, or, like strong emotions or things. And I began to realize that that's just not possible in our human condition. And so transforming suffering, transforming pain for me, rather than getting rid of something, meant to be able to embrace it and to touch it deeply, to be able to look at it head on, and to understand that I have the capacity to be able to embrace this, that this is a noble messenger coming to my life, that for me, I had this conversation with Thich many years ago. We have a gatha in the Plum Village tradition, a little poem that we recite when we wake up in the morning. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours are before me. I vow to live them deeply and beautifully, looking on all beings with eyes of compassion, which is not the usual way many of us wake up. We kind of pull the covers over our head and I don't want to get up. But that's what we practice. But I said to Thich at one point, Thich, I realized I'm not guaranteed a whole day. Like we're not even guaranteed this minute or this breath, that it's not a given. And I've been taking it for granted. And Thich said, you're right, but we have to start somewhere. If people just realize that, well, let's be present for the whole day, it's already a good starting point. But for me, it was a realization that I'm not even guaranteed this in-breath or this out-breath, that I have a terminal condition called life. And so for me, it was a concrete practice of understanding what Larry spoke about. And it was very helpful for me to contemplate the 5 remembrances. Larry spoke about old age. I'm of the nature to get old, to really understand that and embrace it. I'm of the nature to be sick. That's my human condition. And I'm of the nature to die. I'm dying each and every moment. I will be separated. And then my actions are my true belongings. And rather than thinking that there's something wrong with all of these things, such as old age, sickness, and death, that's something like that shouldn't be in the human condition, to have the understanding that this is what we experience as human beings. And that if we look at these 5 remembrances, we understand that the first 3 of them, old age, sickness, and death, they were the things that scared the Buddha the most. They were things that when the Buddha came into contact with someone who was old or sick or dying, they were things that could have caused him to implode in on himself and close down and not want to face life at all. But they called him forth in some way. And in Buddhism, we actually call these 3 things noble messengers, rather than something that we hate and we want to get rid of. We actually, in a strange way, consider them to be holy if we're able to open our heart and receive them as an invitation to live our life a little bit more deeply. Our tendency as humans is to want anything but this, to want anything but our pain or our discomfort. It's a natural thing, but it's when we treat our pain, our discomfort, these experiences that we have in our life with ill will, that they become suffering. For me, I didn't understand until I had this reorientation what was really meant by every day is a good day. I realized that saying in Zen, that every day is a good day. I had this idea that it was kind of avoiding situations, just having this Pollyanna idea. But every day is a good day means for me to show up for my life. And sometimes the most radical thing is to show up for what is and to not necessarily want it to be different. There's this breath, there's this pain, there's this challenge at this moment. But what my choice is, the real choice that I have, is how I can respond. And so the final thing I want to share is in this moment when we're really faced with our mortality on so many levels, we're faced with such a challenging situation. For me, one thing that I have written on a piece of paper next to where I'm sleeping at the moment is a little line from the Discourse on the 8 Realizations of Great Beings, which is a practitioner, a true practitioner is someone who's able to befriend all things. And so this, for me at the moment, this practice of befriending all things also means to befriend the things that I'm afraid of, to befriend my wrong perceptions, to befriend my ideas about how things should be, and to be able to embrace all those things and to see them as part of my path. So healing for me doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the symptoms, but what it means is to show up fully for what is. To be able to embrace my body just as it is, to embrace my emotions just as it is, and to see those rather than being an obstacle, to see them as an invitation. So Amy, I'm so grateful for your question. I wish you all the best, and I wish everybody who's also experiencing emotions of fear and isolation, and also physical manifestations of illness, this strength to go forward. Thank you for being there.
Thank you. So certainly in this pandemic, there's a lot of suffering in the world. We all see it, we all feel it. It seems at the same time, there's a lot of positive things happening as a direct result of it. Many people seem to have a better sense of interbeing, maybe people that are not in the Buddhist tradition, but recognize the interconnectedness. I think I see people being more connected with and loving towards one another, as well as what I like to call the more than human world. My fear is that this will go away once the crisis goes away. So my question is, how can we nurture these very positive things that are taking place as a result of the crisis once it is passed? Thank you.
Oops. I've got this box right in front of my face. So
You're on now.
okay, I was just trying to see you. Thank you, Mike, for your question. What I heard you say is that you're aware of the great suffering that's going on, and you're also aware of the beauties that we're experiencing, both with the stories in the news that are beautiful and some of the connections that are happening for people, people caring for each other. And your question is, how do we continue this? So my question to you would be, how do I continue this? What can I do to continue this? And by this, naming as clearly as you can, which are the positive actions, which are the positive qualities, which are the positive ways of being that you want to make permanent habit energies for you. And so whatever the qualities are, whether it's, I've noticed in my neighborhood, there's a neighbor that's never said hi back to me. And 2 days ago, this neighbor said hi back to me. That was a first. We've been here, almost 2 years. Yeah, so that was the first time I got a hi out of this person. So I thought, all right, this is great. So what is it, what you're going to keep continuing? I think there's things that we can do as an individual, and then there's also things we can do to create islands of sanity. And this, I believe, is one of the things we do in meditation groups, is to hopefully have this beautiful island of sanity, of safety, of happiness, of well-being. And this might be just your family, or it might be just a small group at work. But what can you do as a small collective then to continue these actions of connection, of beauty, of caring, of joy? So I would, in my practice, get more specific, and make it real simple and real concrete so that you can see yourself doing it. So whether it's saying hi to 2 more people, or responding to 2 more people, or one of the things I've been doing in this time is writing more thank you letters. I've had a practice of writing a couple of every day. So listening to your question, I'm going to see what I can do to keep that up. I don't have to just have that happen during this time. But I also wanted to highlight your ability to see the beauty that is going on. You haven't missed that. And this is important for all of us to also focus on that. Because right now we have doctors and nurses and assistants and respiratory therapists and maintenance workers. I worked in a hospital. I was a chaplain and a director of education. And the maintenance workers really have a job. I haven't seen anybody on TV. So that's one of the things I'm going to do, is send some $5 Starbucks coupons to the maintenance workers at our local hospital. But just the fact that you're noticing this and highlighting it and taking the time to savor it, to soak that in. This is how you can maintain it. And this is how you can help others around you maintain it, is if you take the time to really embrace the goodness that is right here, that it's nowhere else. Your feet are in the river of goodness right now, nowhere else. You are in goodness, and soak that in. Soak that in, savor that, get it into your bones, into your blood, into your skin, that there is goodness alive in the world. So that would just get your own island of sanity, your own group, but first of all, in your own being, decide what that's going to be for you, those actions of goodness, those actions of sanity, those actions of connection and caring. And maybe it's just saying hi to a new neighbor, but the simple actions of friendliness and kindness and caring. So thank you for your question. Good luck with your commitment. I know you can do it.
Hello, everyone. My name's Susan, and my question is, how do I integrate my Catholic roots with my Buddhist practices? So being raised in the Catholic tradition, there's many Catholic teachings that I can no longer accept. And the Buddhist teachings in the Plum Village tradition are more meaningful to me. But like today is the Easter Vigil, and, Catholics are celebrating and so forth. So I'm just wondering how to integrate that. Thank you.
Now you're muted, Susan.
Okay, this is a small screen. I can finally see a name. Susan. And sorry, Elizabeth, I couldn't see your name earlier. That's a wonderful question. and a very important one. I have a little familiarity with the Catholic tradition, both in practice and study and teaching theology, et cetera, and working with monastics and religious orders in Rome, et cetera. What I appreciate most about the Catholic tradition is its long history of contemplative practice. I think one of the opportunities of our time in the world today is to learn to recognize, appreciate, and bear witness to the healing and transformational power of contemplative practice, however it may be packaged. One of the skills of mindfulness for me is understanding how to depackage things so the package doesn't get in the way of the experience that is available in contemplative practice, the experience of being able to come home to the historical dimension and at the same time touch the ultimate dimension of our human experience. If you're a person who, you may have done this, if you're a person who likes to read and or study, one of my favorites is the Spiritual Exercises of Saint Teresa of Avila. Great insight into the spiritual journey. Another resource that I've spent time studying and practicing with, of course, is St. Francis. If you like to read novels, Nikos Kazantzakis has a great book called St. Francis, on St. Francis's life and how contemplation changed his life from being a fabric baron into a monastic. So I think contemplation, meditation, and prayer has been with the Catholic tradition from the desert times onward, and it's gotten lost. I think ritual is important, mass is important, et cetera, but without individual practice, without individual contemplative practice / meditative practice, we're missing a great opportunity to heal and transform ourselves and our world. Thich Nhat has a beautiful book called Living Buddha, Living Christ, would be another place with a lot of concrete ways of relating the Christian tradition and the Buddhist tradition from the perspective of practicing and awareness of the energy of mindfulness itself, which in Christianity is Thich Nhat Hanh refers to as the energy of the Holy Spirit. So I find a few years ago, maybe I did 2 retreats on Living Buddha, Living Christ. So for me, there's a deep resonance between Good Friday and this Saturday of being in the tomb and Sunday waking up again. So I find the alignment of the spiritual journey to be consistent. One way I would say to describe the Buddhist practice in relation to this Easter or Eastertide, as it's called in the Christian calendar, is that what the Buddha taught us was to die and to live at every moment. And for me, that's the short way of describing Easter. Jesus taught us the secret to our life is to be able to die and to live at every moment. And this is anchored in our teacher's wisdom and his words, and most importantly, in his practice. So experiment with different Catholic practices, but remember, Catholic, Buddhist, Christian, these are all labels. What's important is your experience of the practice. And then don't get lost or cut off from your roots. There's power in your spiritual traditions, in all of our spiritual traditions and our cultural traditions, that we need to be calling up and calling on at this moment in history like never before. But for me, the great opportunity we have is that we can now talk about this all together. We can learn from one another and continue to go deeper in our journey of mindfulness without having the idea we need to alienate ourselves from the roots that have given us the consciousness we have. Not all those roots are lovely, but they're still our roots. And so learning how to practice with our roots, our religious and spiritual traditions, is an important part of how we mindfully create beloved community, which both Thai and Martin Luther King believe are the keys to our future. But I believe part of those keys come from our contemplative practice. And so nourish your roots, celebrate your roots, try things out. And if things don't work, don't do them. I mean, that's kind of how I come at practice as a whole. Thank you for your wonderful question, and enjoy your Easter weekend.
Dear friends, I've been struggling to find the path to open the hearts of my loved ones, my spouse, my 35-year-old son and Sangha, to talk about my and our impermanence. My son even struggles to hear the five remembrances. I need help to find that path. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. This is a very important question. I'm so glad that you asked it. There's also another question that I feel is somewhat related, and I'm going to just bring that into this response at the same time. And it's from Leonardo, and the question is: in this pandemic time, how can we enhance our practice so that it can help most people who are deeply suffering? So for me, I feel like these two questions go very well together. I was really interested, Andy, in your question, and I thought back to a time when I actually had a chance to be together with Peggy at a place called the Ojai Foundation. Peggy was facilitating a day of mindfulness. Goodness, it was a number of years ago now, maybe close to a decade. And when we arrived there, I was really excited because it was a place where our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, offered his first retreats for artists in the United States. And I'd heard a lot about the Ojai Foundation. So we arrived rather late in the day. It was about sunset, and I got to the yurt where I was going to be staying overnight. And next to the bed was a little pamphlet, which was very attractive. It had the title Gratitude Walk. Please enjoy the Gratitude Walk, and you'll visit all the precious sites at the Ojai Foundation. So I thought to myself, you know what, that'll be a beautiful way to start the day. I will go out, I'll enjoy the Gratitude Walk when the sun's coming up. It'll be lovely. So I studied the map very intently. And I went to bed and got up the next morning and walked out of the yurt with the map in my hands and began walking, and I got immediately lost. I thought, oh my goodness, what do I do? So I backtracked and I went back to the yurt and I went another direction and I got lost. At that moment in time, I wasn't experiencing something that could be described in the usual sense as gratitude. I was experiencing some frustration and things. So I sat down on the deck of the yurt and I looked at the map. I thought, something's wrong here. What's going on? And I looked at the map and I realized that I had been caught in three very prominent words and an arrow that were written on the map. Those three words were, "You are here." And there was an arrow pointing to a certain place on the map. And I realized that that was true for the person who drew the map. It was not true for me. That my job in that moment, what I needed to do was to understand that all of those landmarks and places such as the teaching tree, the deep kiva, and other things that were on the map were there. And that I knew that they were there, but then to put the map down and to embark on the journey that was my own, because I was entering that path from a different place, from the person who drew the map and wrote those words, "You are here." That was true for them, wasn't true for me. So I put down the map, I put a rock on it, on the deck of the yurt that I was staying, and I began to practice walking meditation, just present with every step. So over the course of about an hour, I visited a number of those places. They didn't seem to match, those landmarks didn't seem to match the order that was written on the map. But I came to each place at the right moment and in the right way that was appropriate for me at that moment in my own journey. I made the journey that was uniquely my own. As a parent and as a spiritual practitioner, for sure, in some ways we want to take care of our young ones, to take care of our family, and we want to have these deep conversations. But at the same time, each person's journey is uniquely their own. And so for me, I wonder if there's a way that we can find a way to be able to make our own journey and then to approach it in a different way, perhaps rather than talking about impermanence in the usual way and death and things like that, perhaps having some activities or having some sharings and things like that that speak about the preciousness of our relationships, how much we mean to each other, all of these kind of things, because it can be easy to think that there's a one-size-fits-all roadmap of the journey that's the same for everybody, but it's really not. And particularly in these moments when we're faced with very deep and visceral fears, there can be a tendency to really just be overwhelmed and to find it challenging to just get through the day, let alone to look at these very deep and important questions. So my gut feeling would be to approach it from a different angle, to not necessarily feel like everybody's on the same page, but to ask ourselves, when I want to have these conversations, what is it that I'm hoping to experience? Am I feeling some fear and needing to share that? Am I wanting to share with my young one how precious he or she is to me? Am I wanting to share that with my partner? What am I wanting to share? And approach it from that angle rather than feeling like my loved ones or my friends need to have approach things in the same way as me. That would be my approach. Last year I was in France, and it was very hot. It was a heat wave when I was in France, and I went to the bookstore because I didn't have a hat. And I decided maybe I'll try to find a hat. And they had a hat there that says one size fits all. So I purchased it with a lot of confidence. So I walked out of the bookstore of Upper Hamlet and put it on, and it didn't fit my head at all. So either there might be something wrong with my head, or perhaps one size fits all was not exactly true. So I think also this is a time where our compassion can also mean just holding space for ourselves and for others. And the question of Leonardo, which goes along with that, was how do I help others during this pandemic time? And so, I fly a lot. And when we fly, the flight attendants always, somebody just said, "It's my head, Phap Hai." Somebody wrote in the chat. I agree. It is my head. Isn't that? When I fly, at the moment we're not flying much, but when we fly, we're always told to put on our oxygen mask before helping others, which I think is really wise life advice. I think there's probably a Dharma book in there somewhere. So when we're thinking about helping others, I think first of all, it's important to be able to help ourselves, to ask ourselves how we're feeling, how to nurture our own heart, to nurture our own centeredness, to be able to, rather than help, first of all, with words and kind of thoughts, but to be able to offer a quality that we call in Buddhism non-fear, this quality of presence and solidity that's really needed right now. So what are the concrete actions, both inner and outer, that we can take that's really of help? So I would say nurturing ourselves, nurturing our non-fear, helping ourselves, taking care of ourselves, taking concrete actions every day. And then from taking actions to help others, everything springs from that. For example, one concrete way to help others is to stay at home. Here in Australia, we don't have much choice, which I'm really happy about. I think it's great. We're seeing some downturn in the curve, but I also see like a lot of people are really fearful and afraid, and I understand that. It's a really radical shift in our circumstances, but at the same time, rather than seeing it as a punishment or something to struggle with, can we see that boundary as an act of loving kindness by staying home, by assuming that I could be contagious and assuming that other people are like Brother Phap Hai with very weak immune systems? Perhaps rather than being an act of disconnection, it's an acknowledgement of our connection. So that's one concrete way to take care of others. And then for us in the monastic tradition, we're lucky enough, actually, we're quite privileged that every year we have 3 months at least in which we actually have an experience of lockdown. We have the 3 months rains retreat in which we set physical boundaries, and we're not allowed to go outside of the monastery except for very important things such as medical care or supplies. That's about it. And so we're used to this. And in the beginning, I used to suffer with this a lot the first few years, but then I realized that in fact, it was a great gift of rest and reorientation, as I've spoken about before. In the traditional ceremonies to begin this retreat, we actually bless the physical boundaries. We actually indicate them and bless them, and we see them as practice partners for us. So I would invite those of us who are feeling isolated, cut off, afraid, to take some time to actually physically walk around your environment and bless the physical boundaries outside. And then also to consider to yourself, what are my inner areas of attention during this time? So on the one hand, one way to help others is taking care of our own emotions, of being aware of where we are, of staying home, but also to be aware that this moment when it can seem that we're disconnected is actually a deep act of loving kindness, of protective loving kindness for ourselves and for others. So I hope some of that was helpful. May it be a blessing on your path.
Hi, Daylin. Thanks.
Hi, dear Sangha. My name is Daylin Alosegi. I'm from Miami, Florida, and I'm going through this crisis just like everyone. I have a lot of suffering, but my question kind of like goes beyond that, because I'm kind of like, thanks to Thich Nhat, I know how to deal with my suffering. I know that every crisis comes for a reason, so I have taken this crisis like a Zen master to find myself, my true non-self. And I would like to not waste this crisis. And at the end of all of this, however long it takes, I would like to be a different person, not be the same person. Thank you.
So, dear Daylin, thank you for your question. I believe I'm unmuted. Is that correct? Okay. I love your question. How can I use this time as a time of initiation and healing? I'm reminded of Joseph Campbell's teachings in this moment in time. And that's the reminder of the spiritual journey and the recognition of crossing a threshold. And so I believe you feel like you've crossed the threshold into your initiatory time. And to recognize, a really important point is to recognize there's always allies when we're on a spiritual journey. They often aren't who we think they're going to be. So sometimes we can miss the fact that we have these amazing allies because we wanted somebody else to be that ally. So I just wanted to bring that out to make sure that there's surprising allies when we go into a time of initiation. And we're all in a time of initiation as I experience it. I've been doing the same thing and really looking at how I can use this time to reimagine my life and to reinvent myself. And I've been using this time to really not try to answer that question myself, but to let that be part of my spiritual practice. And so with my spiritual practice, every day we've been sitting, we found that our favorite time, the time that we have 3 people here, and we seem to be keeping totally different shifts, but we do seem to be able to get together before dinner in the evening. And we also seem to be able to take a long walk. We're lucky where we are in Taos, New Mexico, because we only have 8,000 people. So it's very easy where I am to take a walk in nature. And so as part of my time of initiation, I'm really listening to nature. And I don't know where you are in Miami, but the wind spirits, the spirit of the wind, the spirit of the land, the amazing sister moon we had this week. Oh my goodness, so close to the earth. So yeah, I just would recognize the fact and name it, and maybe have a special altar. It's one of the things we're doing this weekend with Easter weekend. We're setting a special altar to help us recognize that we're in a deep spiritual journey with what's going on. And earlier I mentioned I'm writing thank you notes. That's been a part of my practice for many years, but I'm using it to deepen this time. So you don't have to do what I'm doing. I'm just trying to name some things that might bring something to mind. What will nourish your best self? What will really help you recognize that you are right in the middle of your holy life? It is nowhere else. It's right here, right now. What act of goodness can you do? How can you serve other people? We're doing Wednesday night crowdcasts every other week, and we're really making them a little bit more unusual because we're wanting to have some fun with what we're offering. So you might tune into our website. This week we have, next week we have a Native American singer and chanter with us. So again, look for something fun too, playful, just to ignite that spirit that is alive in you. And whatever makes your heart, Larry used to use the expression with a bellow like a calf. Who was that? Cousin Kazantzakis. Yeah, in his report to Greco is what makes your heart bellow like a cow. So just to look at that. So to figure out what the qualities are, the practices are. Again, for me, it's sitting meditation, walking meditation. We've also been enjoying different virtual mindful movement classes, different yoga classes, and different qigong. It's just amazing what's available. The internet is like it's exploded, and aren't we lucky? And I'm also taking the time to write people where I've been out of touch with. So figure out what it is and just have a wonderful time with this reinvention of who you are. And thank you for your great question. Enjoy your time of initiation.
So we have one last question, and I'm going to read it to you, Larry. It is from Alice, and it is, how can I stop feeling frustrated and feel more compassion for and forgive the people in the world that aren't following the protocols from our governments and medical leaders and are still going out in groups and putting everyone at risk?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. It is one of my own questions. And there's several layers to this, which you, I'm sure, are aware. First is our conditioning as individuals to see ourselves as islands. And therefore, what I do matters to me. And I'm not especially, I don't have a sense, this to me is an actual human crisis. There's lots of commentaries on failed states. I'm concerned about a failed species. I'm talking about the human species. And so I think it's really, really important to come down to earth. I know we use the language of waking up. I think that's more accurate, but I came across a great little piece by Pema Chodron on waking down. What does it mean to wake up to our whole body? To wake up to not only the brightness of our mind, the luminosity of our mind, but also wake up to the luminosity of our body. And this only comes through practice. And by practice, I don't mean you get this insight simply sitting in meditation. I mean, the practice of mindfulness and meditation also builds a reservoir within our hearts and in our minds so that we can receive insight even in very difficult circumstances, even in painful circumstances. It's like part of the power of mindfulness practice is that it builds within us a resource that we can bring to bear in our circumstances. I think we have to have enforcement. This is to pick up a comment from Brother Phap Hai earlier. We need the fierce face of compassion. I think another comment earlier about this is to me all about impermanence and emptiness. The idea that the virus has a map of states and counties and countries and languages is an illusion, one of the greatest illusions of a human being. And we have designed a world so labeled, so socially constructed that we cannot even recognize that all of us have the same human immune system. And so part of what we need to do is enforcement. Part of what we need to do is education. So many of us are unaware of our bodies, how our bodies work, about our basic biology. So we literally think our belief or our myth about things can protect us from biology. It will not. As history has illustrated over thousands of years. Come home to the body. And so education, enforcement, and personal practice and demonstration. So I can't go outside and see my neighbor and say, why don't you have on a mask if I don't have on a mask? Or whatever the social distancing or other methods that we need to make sure we heal all of us. And so I am concerned. I see the tragedy of overemphasis on individualism putting us all at risk. But I don't think many people understand that. So disassociated we've become from one another in the modern world that it's hard for us to understand what we do matters beyond our immediate gratification. our immediate satisfaction, our immediate comfort. So demonstration of what's required, we need to embody what's required to heal ourselves with this virus. We need to understand also that the virus is us. It is not our enemy. It is a part of our human experience and doesn't need to be hated or run from. It needs to be faced with honesty, with integrity, and with humility. So that we cannot, what's the right way to say this? So that we cannot, I reread a great play by, who am I thinking? Oh, Albert Camus this week called The Plague. And I'm an old existentialist. So I remembered it and I reread it this week. And it's simply about human beings having to come to terms with this anxiety. The German word Angst, I like the sound of that, this anxiety that lies within us about our own humanness itself. And mindfulness practice for me, and the reason I continue to be a mindfulness practitioner and learner, is a mindfulness practice has helped me learn how to recognize my anxiety, recognize my fear, recognize my angst, and not be overcome by it. But in fact, to embrace it as a part of the privilege and the preciousness of having a human life. So yes, I'm from it. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in the inner city. I've lived all over the world in many circumstances. So we need to enforce rules. I think this is something that, and not in ways that are cruel. I think we have this temptation, especially in the US but I see it in India, I've seen it in other places, we have really traumatic reactions to people who won't follow the rules. So people are being beaten and shot at, and I don't think that will solve the problem because we have too many people misbehaving and desperate and afraid, as rightly they should be. So I think education, enforcement with compassion, and our own demonstration of what it means to do self-care for self and others. Thank you.
Dear friends, our time together is coming to a close, but I wanted to share some resources with you to how to stay connected with our community and with our monks and nuns and our lovely teachers. First of all, to stay connected, you can visit the foundation website, tnhf.org, and you'll find a way to sign up for a monthly newsletter. You'll find practice resources. Our monthly newsletter also includes teachings and meditations, and a way to find a Sangha. If you go under community on our website, there will be a listing of Sangha directories. So a place to find people who will help and support you in your mindfulness practice, and to have a sense of community, which is so important right now. Our publishing house, Parallax Press, is offering a 40% discount on books by our summit authors. So books by Peggy and Larry, books by Brother Phap Hai, and key practice books by Tay. So if you go to parallax.org/footsteps and enter in the code footsteps, you'll be able to get a 40% off discount, which is really lovely. And then also to stay connected with our monasteries. A lot of our monasteries are doing live streams of their sitting meditations, live streams of their Dharma talks. So if you go to plumvillage.org live, you'll be able to follow along. And then, sorry, to stay connected to Larry and Peggy, our wonderful Larry and Peggy, you can visit their website, lotusinstitute.org. So like everyone in the world right now, our dear monks and nuns have been affected by the coronavirus outbreak. They've had to close all 10 monasteries worldwide. So that means their way of earning a living, of putting food on the table, which is through having retreats at the monasteries, is unfortunately not an option right now. So yet they've been working diligently to bring as much of their teachings and practices online for us. So our monastics have always been there for us. So I know, I really know so many people are in financial difficulty and in suffering deeply right now. But if you do have the ability to help, we hope you will consider donating to support our dear brothers and sisters. Your gift at any level is deeply appreciated, and unrestricted gifts are particularly helpful right now so that we can ensure the funds are dispersed to the monasteries most in need at any given time. So if you visit tnhf.org, that's where you'll be able to find information about giving. And lastly, I'll leave you with a quote by Thich, which is really applicable. It is probable that the next Buddha may take the form of a community practicing understanding and loving kindness, a community practicing mindful living. This may be the most important thing we can do for the survival of the earth. So I've been so inspired. So many people are extending community to strangers, to their neighbors. And it's a testament to Thay's insight that so many people understand that our way forward is through collective effort. So thank you for being such a source of inspiration with your mindfulness practice, your stability and your peace, for being here. Your stability and peace is so needed right now. We like to say the way out is in, and now we know for sure that the way forward is together. So let us end together with coming together with our breaths, coming together to pay attention to our lungs and to bring peace and calmness to first ourselves, but also radiate it out to our whole world right now. So let us enjoy the sound of the bell to close. Thank you all so much for joining today. Thank you to our teachers. Please continue to be well and healthy. And we look forward to welcoming you back to our monasteries when we're able to open again. Really, thank you. Thank you for being together with us. Bye. The teachers want to unmute to say bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Take care of each other.
Be safe.